All right. Welcome. This is day one of AML, The Truth Hurts. I'm so happy to be here with the always a fantastic and my good friend and independent thinker, Jim Richards. I'd like to say thank you to our sponsors, Thomson Reuters and Illicit Edge. We all know that putting on an event like this is not easy, nor is it without cost. So thank you. If you are joining us, please make sure you submit your questions. We will get to them throughout when they are tied to the topics we're going to be going through, and then we will save some time also at the end. Please remember to sign up for day 2 this Thursday. There's a link in the comment section. So our theme today is regulation by non-enforcement or regulation by enforcement. And I think that's a pretty interesting question that Jim is going to walk us through. But before we get to that, I'd like to take a quick 30 seconds, highlight some of the aspects of Thomson Reuters Clear product that I find to be relevant to today's discussion and Thursday's discussion as well. As you can see on the screen, Clear now offers an AI business report called Risk Analysis Summary. It leverages both the internal third-party records that Clear has had for years on businesses, while also doing open source searches on the company, throwing in some adverse media, sanctions checks. It fully documents everything and sources via footnotes with records in about a minute. Open source intelligence researchers can save time. We no longer have to do all the things we know that we do, which is going out and Googling and looking at reviews and social media and negative news, et cetera. And this risk analysis summary really gathers it all, as well as it summarizes and notes the key risks on the businesses and its principals and beneficial owners in the yellow. And here's an example of where it actually did identify risk. While the first company did not have risk indicators, this one actually does. So this type of summary info is helpful for anyone in the financial crime or investigative function. Thanks again to Thomson Reuters and their Clear product for sponsoring us today. And with that, I'd like to get to Jim. I've had the privilege of knowing you for several years. We have a lot of non-public discussions and rants and ravings throughout the years, and I deeply appreciate your friendship, your the way that you lift up people in this industry, but you also have a fresh, frank view, a realistic view of everything that's going on. And for probably, the two people that don't know who Jim is, he's been in the anti-financial crime space for over 30 years. I don't know how many different administrations you've been through. I was trying to do the math before this, and the math wasn't mathing. But the last position you had, you ran Wells Fargo, their anti-financial crime area. You were an EVP, I believe, and you also were current former attorney. So you also have the legal perspective, but you also have true operational perspective of an AML officer. 4 years ago, we did a webinar, almost 4 years to the day. We did a webinar on the Corporate Transparency Act and the impact it would have at the time in a different way from the beneficial ownership requirements of the CDD rule. Funny enough, Thomson Reuters also was involved in that webinar. But, we're kind of coming full circle here. So 4 years later, let's start there. Beneficial ownerships, the gutting of the Corporate Transparency Act, everything we thought was going to have a benefit, all the questions we had 4 years ago, and now we're here. April 17th, FinCEN issued an interim final rule that gutted it, gave us what I tell people, it gave us like kind of a quick kick to the shins if you are in the anti-financial crime space. I know that you submitted a comment letter. I read it. I laughed in some parts because it's very true, but also the way that you address things have humor in it, because we have to at least find some humor, even if it's cheeky humor, in some of what's going on. So you wrote that you had disdain for their reasons, you question the legality of their actions, et cetera. There were some harsh words in there. There were some salty, funny moments, but there were some harsh words. So I'd love to know, how do you really feel about the CTA? And just in case anyone has not read it, we are going to put the link in the comments for his blog post. I think it goes great with a nice, nice glass of Cabernet when you read that. So with that, can you tell us how you really feel?
Yeah. So first of all, they call it an interim final rule, and that kind of bollocksed up a few people. It's a final rule, so it's final. Forget it. But there's a number of lawsuits out there also where the courts may rule that the CTA is unconstitutional. So the administration kind of might have front run some of those decisions once they come down. Who knows? The courts may dismantle the CTA, but Treasury has already dismantled it, frankly. So it started as an expressed effort by FinCEN to reduce the burden for many US small businesses. That was their goal. But what it did was eliminated the burden for all US small businesses. Now, the gyrations that Treasury and FinCEN did to go from, a lack of or a significant vulnerability, which lack of beneficial ownership was, it was a glaring hole in our system. And that was the argument they used for 15 years in putting this CTA together. And then all of a sudden, poof, it hits in March and April of 2025. And now it doesn't serve the public interest. So those gyrations, to me, the mental gymnastics, were frankly stupid, to use a technical term. And here's what I call the Mae West kicker. Now, Mae West was an actress back in the 40s or 50s, whenever it was, but she said at one point, there's only two kinds of men I like, foreign and domestic. And so this is what FinCEN has done, although they're a little bit more confused than Mae West when it comes to foreign and domestic. So foreign companies owned by foreign persons have to provide beneficial ownership information, okay? So the next combination, foreign companies owned by domestic persons or US persons, they don't have to provide their beneficial owner information. Then you go to domestic companies owned by domestic persons or US persons, they don't have to, but here's the kicker. Domestic companies owned by foreign persons, they don't have to provide their beneficial ownership information. So Vladimir Putin's British Virgin Islands company doing business in America, it's got to disclose that Vlad is its beneficial owner. But if Vlad has a Wyoming LLC, nothing.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of news articles over the years. I know ones that you and I have contributed to going back 6-7 years about the Wild Wild West in Wyoming and how individuals can own large pieces of land, stick a trailer on there, and they're a registered agent now and they are for sale for foreign companies to come and get U.S. domestic, right? And this is going years before the AML Act even came into play, much less the CTA, much less the gutting of the CTA. So I can't even imagine how many foreign companies, truly foreign companies we have that set up shop here, but have U.S. owners because they're able to hire them, right? Or hide behind our onshore, offshore states like Wyoming and a few others. That's what I like to call them. So with that, I think it's great to talk about FATF, Financial Action Task Force. Back in 2016, they gave us a non-compliant, one of several, in recommendation 24 specifically, though, and that has to do with the beneficial ownership of legal persons. And, part of the CTA, I think a large impetus in getting the CTA passed was to get us into a compliant or a partially compliant stance in recommendation 24. And now we just, is there like a rating less than non-compliant? Like they don't care if they're not compliant? I'm not sure what that acronym is, but something like that.
There should be, I think, in this case. So the US was, because of the ratings it got stuck with in 2016, it's been up under what they call follow-up reports. And there's been a bunch of them. And actually, I think it was the 7th follow-up report that was done, specifically looked at that recommendation 24, which was transparency and beneficial ownership of legal persons, and that non-compliant rating you talked about. And that was actually done by a Canadian, a Royal Canadian Mounted Police guy by the name of Ian McDonald did that follow-up report. And he actually gave them a double bump. So they went from non-compliant, they went straight past partially compliant into largely compliant. And it was all because of the CTA and the two rules, the access and safeguard rules. So I don't know what's going to happen. The CTA gutted, a new evaluation is upcoming. The U.S. could find itself with that rating falling back to non-compliant.
Yeah, and I think this is one of many of our of the recommendations. I know that one of the hills that I'll probably die on is the fintech, unregulated fintech, and the very nascent, out of date 1980s MSB laws that govern crypto and govern fintechs. And unfortunately, FATF in the past has not sent in the people to ask the right questions. So I'm hoping this time around that they ask the right second, third, fourth level questions to really get to the heart of recommendation 14 and 15, specifically when it comes to unregulated payment companies. But when you take those into account with also recommendation 24 and how we've gone back, it doesn't look good. And so, from where I'm sitting, and I get, I have the privilege, much like you, to work in several regimes throughout the world, not just the US. So, I get a little jealous, a little FOMO when I'm working, with clients in Australia, and I'm looking at what Austrac does. And I'm like, dang it, why aren't we doing that, right? Mm-hmm. So, when I'm working with clients in the UK and in the US, I mean, from an insider, but trying to be very subjective, the US and the UK are some of the world's largest money laundering centers. And, but nobody ever gray lists us because I don't know. I guess the thing of the too big to fail is the same for these large banks as it is for these countries. I don't know. So our second topic, risk-based. Are we not gray listed because we're too big, or are we not gray listed because that risk-based approach, which drives me crazy? I know you talk a lot about that. Risk-based approach, I feel like, is just a filler term for I don't want to ask that second question. So I'm just going to say it's a risk-based approach. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I guess the question is, with the US and the UK, how we should be gray listed, but we're not. Is that because of the risk-based approach or lack of risk-based approach, a true risk-based approach from the FATF?
Yeah, I think it is. I think, well, first of all, the risk-based approach, as you say, it's the most talked about, most misunderstood, and most poorly executed concept that we have in AML. And by the way, it is an invention of the FATF, at least as applied to AML CFT, because humans have been employing the risk-based approach since caveman days. That thing ate Bork yesterday, so I run away today, right? So it's pretty simple concept, but when it comes to AML, and it might be the consultants and the bureaucrats and the regulators have turned this whole thing into a game of octopus twister. I mean, it's nothing ties a bank into knots any faster than risk appetites and risk strategies and risk assessments and risk-based this and on it goes. But the FATF, ironically, doesn't seem to worry too much about taking a risk-based approach when it comes to doing their evaluations of countries' AML programs. The United States is judged kind of the same way as Bhutan and New Zealand and everybody else. And I think if the FATF actually took a risk-based approach when conducting its evaluations and did it with integrity, the US, the UK, China, all the sort of big countries with big money laundering problems and big economies and pushing a lot of payments through, they would be evaluated much more harshly than the small ones. And who knows?
So you think they would get gray listed? They being the three countries that you just named?
If the FATF took a risk-based approach to its evaluations and did it with integrity, the US would probably get gray listed. However, I've got a better chance of getting kicked to death by a duck than the US has of being gray listed by the FATF. Even if the FATF members hinted at a gray listing, this administration would pull a hissy fit and run away and quit the FATF altogether. I mean, we've quit the World Health Organization, we've quit UNESCO, we've quit the Human Rights Council. What's FATF? You know, it's pretty easy to quit if they put their mind to it.
Yeah, that's, you know, I don't know. Like, I didn't want to think about going to that where we actually would quit. But I mean, it is kind of the logical, you know, end result of some of the decisions we've seen so far in the last 7 months. And that's unfortunate. I can't imagine a world in which the US is not part of the FATF. But, you know, if we do become gray listed, which again, I don't know if that's even in the cards, but if we do have a lot more non-compliant ratings this time around, I see that knee-jerk reaction falling in line with what we've already seen the last 7 months. And that's unfortunate. So, but speaking about this current administration, I'd like to talk about that regulation by non-enforcement. So we have the crypto industry. They've complained for years about regulation by enforcement, particularly because there's been some lack of clarity, SEC, the CFTC, the, you know, what kind of product is this? Who is their regulator? You know, the tokens, the assets, who's offering what, and who has oversight and enforcement. Under this current administration, it seems like the opposite is happening, where it's regulation by non-enforcement, which is very interesting. That was something you brought up a couple of weeks ago. And I want to get your thoughts on that, because at least for as long as I've been in the industry, it's been regulation by enforcement. And now we're seeing regulation by non-enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, regulation by enforcement, bad. Regulation by non-enforcement, good. So I just honestly, Sarah, I don't get it. You know, the uncertainty remains. That was, you know, the crypto firms just aren't getting jammed up by the SEC or the DOJ. So they don't seem to, we're always worried about the uncertainty and getting jammed up. But now that they're not getting jammed up, they're not worried about the uncertainty of lack of, you know, regulation. So, but it's not just the SEC. You know, the DOJ has disbanded its crypto enforcement group. And we might be drifting a little bit here. The president has declared that the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which essentially prohibits US companies from paying bribes to foreign kleptocrats, won't be enforced. Apparently, it's not fair that US companies can't bribe foreign officials when everybody else is bribing them. But he also disbanded the DOJ's kleptocracy team. And those are the guys, not the DOJ, but the kleptocrats are the guys getting the bribes, right? So it's sort of the flip side of the FCPA coin. You can bribe kleptocrats and the DOJ won't go after those kleptocrats anymore. So US companies bribing foreign kleptocrats is also regulation by non-enforcement.
You know, when I first saw this, when this was announced about the FCPA, I thought it was interesting, right? I'm not a lawyer. I don't dabble too much in the financial crime space of FCPA rollout. However, a large part of that is PEP, right? Politically exposed persons. And I feel like that, I mean, what's the point of monitoring a PEP if one of the, you know, the main typology that we're going to be looking for when we see a politically exposed person, foreign, right? Because we don't have any regulations for domestic PEPs. The only country that doesn't do that. Gotta love that. Everyone else's politicians are, you know, prone to corruption, but not ours. But for foreign PEPs, so the FCPA, to me, what I'm saying is that it wasn't just an isolated gutting of that. It also has a direct impact on whether or not foreign politically exposed persons actually carry risk under the exam manual. And there's been nothing that I've seen. I mean, I know that you're always out and looking at news and opinions and draft bills and all this kind of stuff. I haven't seen anything rolling back what we're supposed to do in the exam manual for foreign politically exposed persons. But I mean, to me, those are very much linked. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, they are linked, and yeah, and there's nothing coming out of FinCEN on this issue at all. I mean, they're not coming out and saying, okay, so, hey guys, everybody relax. The FCPA is not being enforced anymore, so let's do this or don't do that.
Yeah.
We're not getting that kind of guidance from FinCEN, which is unfortunate. But by the way, I'm probably a PEP because I am the brother-in-law of a former senior member of the British civil service, British government. So I'm one of those risky PEPs you got to be on the alert for.
Once a PEP, always a PEP. See, and that's part of the issue is nobody wants to take a clear stance and say, you're only a PEP if you're this. So it's up to interpretation and the risk-based approach about how many layers down or how many, parties removed from the political person is a PEP considered, right? And this is something that's been long wrestled with, especially in other countries. It's like, well, is it the brother-in-law, right? So is it the brother not by marriage, the brother by marriage, right? The sister, the parent, is it the step parent? Is it the daughter of the ex-wife? I mean, there's so many different things. And I feel like without proper definition, or at least a proper constraint, like, hey, it's not everyone and their mom. It's, people who have direct access to somebody who can influence that. I think that is something that can get quite scope creepy in other countries, not in the US, again, because we don't really do much with that. And even now with the FCPA, even though it's not directly linked to that, it's still part of that risk that's directly linked. Foreign politically exposed persons or foreign heads of businesses. And I don't know, I think it'll be interesting to see if there's any consent orders having to do with foreign PEPs in the US for the next three years and 4 months, but I doubt it. I doubt it. So I wanted to talk about, and we can spend some time on this because I think SAR and CTR threshold, you've got a great background in where this is based, but also you have a big bank perspective of SAR and CTR threshold. I have a smaller bank perspective of CTR and SAR threshold. We've both worked with law enforcement agencies over the years. And so I just kind of want to start unpacking that because I think there's a lot of opinions, a lot of political opinions that I think need to stop because they've never written a SAR, they've never written a CTR, they've never filled out a CTR, they've never done an investigation, and yet they're sitting there opining on what these thresholds should be. So I know you've written a lot about it, but can you give us, a summary? I know that you can probably go on for the rest of the time about this, but can you, spend some minutes, give us some background on the CTR's SAR threshold and what you think the right number should be or should be based on.
Okay. So, and I won't go off on one of my usual rants. Dial me back in about 2 minutes if you can. So the CTR was one of the 3 original BSA-related reports, and that was in the first AML law in 1970. There's nothing in that law, and there's still nothing in the BSA today that speaks to a threshold. Okay, the threshold is in the regulations, or thresholds for both. Now, the first CTR regulation was published in 1972. So what's that? Too many years ago, 50 something years ago. It set the threshold at more than $10,000. It remains at that same threshold today. So people argue that the threshold should be raised to account for inflation, which would make the threshold about $75,000. I think they're wrong for a bunch of reasons, and I'll lay out maybe 3 or 4. First, the $10,000 threshold actually comes from a 1954 rule for the Trading with the Enemy Act, TWIA, which is a OFAC sanctions type of an act. So if your inflation logic holds, the CTR threshold would be about $175,000, going back to the $10,000 that was first set in 1954. And that makes 0 sense whatsoever. Second, inflation has nothing to do with adjusting the threshold, because the test is not how much can you buy with a certain amount of money. The test is, does that report provide highly useful information to law enforcement? And the simple fact remains, we don't know what is a highly useful threshold for CTRs or SARs. Law enforcement is unable or unwilling to tell us. But we do know a couple of things. We know that you can kill everybody in Fairfax, Virginia with $10,000 in fentanyl. We know you can traffic 4 human beings for $10,000. So I think it's still a relevant number. Third, and I think most important, the threshold has little to do with the burden of preparing CTRs. The burden is caused by aggregating cash transactions, which you have to do over a 24-hour period, and multiple beneficiaries and conductors. Now, when I was at Wells Fargo, we had a team of over 100, I think it was 110 people in the CTR department. They did anywhere from 1.5 million to 1.8 million CTRs a year. Roughly half of them had to be touched by a human because of the aggregation, multiple beneficiaries, multiple conductors, etc. It's not the threshold. You have a single transaction for more than $10,000, file the report, and human doesn't have to touch it.
Yeah.
By the way, the average cash transaction is about $20.
Oh.
So a reporting threshold that is 500 times the average transaction doesn't seem that unreasonable to me.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think before we get to the SAR threshold number, because I know that you've written a lot about different types of SARs over the years and what that threshold should be. But before we get to that, I think for the CTRs, one of kind of like my wishful thinking, we have a limited number of core banking systems, and all of those core banking, and by core banking systems, I don't mean the actual systems. I mean the companies that provide the core banking systems. And a lot of them have automatic reporting to the government for various things, not having to do with our industry. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why we don't just keep it at that, right? That 10,000 and up, or over 10,000 number. And as soon as a TRAN code that has a cash number to it has that dollar amount, why are we not just automatically saying, here government, take it? It's a lot like what Canada does when they do the electronic fund transfers, right? Over 10,000, those have to be automatically reported to FinTrack. Why aren't we just doing that? Now, will we catch all of the different aggregation, right? The joint that's on a checking account, that's a primary on the savings account, and is the conductor, will some of our core systems miss those if they aren't collecting conductor? Yes. But will it come up in a suspicious activity alert? Yeah, probably, especially if they're structuring. So why not just make it more of a, banks are removed from that process, and we're just sending the government transactional information, which I can feel all of the, libertarians of the world go, what? I don't want the government to have all that information. But I don't know. I mean, I guess if you had a panacea for this, what would it be? I mean, that's the only thing I can think of.
I think you've kind of nailed it there, because it's a balance of the burden of preparing these things and their utility for law enforcement, either tactical utility for a particular case or strategic to figure out trends and patterns, etc. I don't know, because law enforcement, again, isn't telling us, what good are CTRs? What do they use them for? How do they use them? What triggers them to use them, etc. We need to know that. But I think regardless of that, if it's just that single cash transaction of more than $10,000, a cash deposit into Sarah's account, that core system can automatically spit out 10,000 deposit to Sarah's account and send that information into FinCEN. Simple. Nobody has to touch it. Libertarians can't, well, they'll squawk and whine anyway, but we're sending it in today, except we're sending it in on Jim because I happen to have a joint account with Sarah. And then we're sending, we're including the name and the information of the armored car driver who delivered a bag of checks and cash to a cash vault, that kind of stuff. By the way, when FinCEN did that guidance on cash vaults and armored carriers and CTRs and all that, I had been doing a lot of work with FinCEN on that. And I actually asked them, I said, did you guys actually visit a cash vault before you wrote this advisory? And they went, nope. I said, you got to know how a cash vault works. You can't do it. So anyway.
And I get to work with several different systems and trying to come up with proper aggregation logic. And it's not as easy as this person is, this person with this SSN is a joint here and a primary here, aggregate. It also has to do with whether or not they benefited, right? The people who benefited from the transaction, because that's a separate section of the CTR. And it gets super, super complex. And it would be great to be able to show the lawmakers how much goes into this and how much still isn't able to be automated and still requires a human, right? I mean, super sophisticated technology, it still requires a human to go, oh, wait, actually that person didn't technically benefit from it because of XYZ. Let's remove it, or that person did. So let's add them and create a whole nother page for the person who benefited from the transaction. Yeah. It's super, super complex, and it doesn't have to be. And like you said, we are already reporting this. And because it is just a static one-way report, I will say that what IRS Criminal Investigative Services is doing to provide information about the number of reports filed with the government and how useful they are, I wish that was something that was required across all of the agencies, all of the consumers of these reports. That would be great. Like, hey, every agency, we are going to monitor your effective use of all of these reports and all the time that these private businesses and financial institutions are spending to provide you this information. We want to know, what are you doing with it, right? And I think, and I've seen your comments praising what CI is doing, what Lauren Corr is doing there and her team. And, for me, that should be the gold standard for all of the agencies, for all the consumers of these reports, that they have to tell us, hey, these CTRs are useful or they're not. And this is why, right? I don't know. Do you have any?
No, absolutely. I mean, to me, it's absolute madness that we are tuning all of our AML systems on like alerts to SARs. And that to me is the dumbest thing. Who cares if a SAR is filed? Is it any good? So unless we can tune our systems on useful SARs that law enforcement found useful, the whole tuning thing is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
I would also, would it kill FinCEN to provide CTR stats? Would it just kill them? I don't think it would. I'd also do something else. I would make it mandatory for every examiner, every federal agency examiner, to actually sit down for a day and fill in some CTRs and investigate and write and file a SAR.
Yes.
Because I don't think any of them ever done either one of those things. It's like having your swimming coach can't swim, it's never been to a pool.
It's funny because that was actually part of the AML Act, was the examiner boot camp was the original design of that part of it. And I was, part of a small team of people that got to have a say in that. And, it's because, especially, under the prior administration, we really saw an uneven application of requirements and expectations from similar size financial institutions, right? From banks to credit unions, depending on who the bank regulator was, we would not see the same type of expectations when it came to what the examiners, were holding as their personal standard for their bank that was under their purview. And the same, I think part of what cures that uneven enforcement, I guess is the word I'm going for, would be for them to file a CTR, to have to do the manual aggregation, to look at the conductor file, who actually conducted these transactions, right? It's not always the people that are on the account. And then following that into a SAR and what it takes to write a SAR. I'm going to put you on the spot. I know that you write a lot about SARs and the Paperwork Reduction Act, I think, and how long it takes, and over the years, the way in which different agencies that I won't name have stated that SARs take a few minutes to write. And, from a big bank perspective, I can't imagine the complexity of SARs that you had to file, right? They weren't, a two paragraph narrative, right? They were probably pages and pages and pages that would take some of your most skilled investigators days to, put together. And then we see these reports where they're like, oh no, it takes you, I forget the number. Was it like 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 3?
Yeah,
I mean, it was something.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, here's a fun fact, and this comes from stats from 2020 that FinCEN put out. And I'll sort of cut to the chase. 80% of banks in the United States will file, on average, less than one SAR a week. And the 4 biggest banks file about 500 a day. Think of that. 500 a day versus 1 a week. So 2 very, very different situations, obviously. The big banks have special investigations units. As you do a lot of proactive investigations, it can take weeks to investigate a SAR. So again, the averages are a little bit skewed, right? Bill Gates and I have an average net worth of $50 billion, right? So averages can be a little deceptive. FinCEN needs to get a little bit more reasonable and really sit down and understand, even at a small institution, and I've been in a bunch of them, and you have a bunch of our clients. It takes multiple people sitting down, collaborating, talking, writing, rewriting. You want to do a good SAR, and then you want to call law enforcement up. Then you've got QA, QC, reporting to the board. There's a lot that goes into it. And it would be nice if FinCEN could come up with some reasonable estimates. Because right now, every time these come out, I just get irritated. 7 minutes. No, it's not.
Yeah. And, unfortunately for smaller banks, I feel like, again, kind of going back to, I think one of the main causes of some of the things you just brought up is because we don't have examiners that are thinking, oh, small community bank, small credit union. And by small, I mean under 10 billion in assets, right? That's 90% of our institutions, under 10 billion in assets. So when I say small, I mean that. Most of the people holding them accountable aren't thinking, oh, criminals love to hide out in community institutions and credit unions because they think the best of their customers, right? That's not the posture that they take in these exams. So these community banks and credit unions are told over the years of having these exams, everything's fine, everything's fine, everything's fine. Y'all are doing great, right? 90% of their SARs are fraud related, and then the other 10% are structuring related. And they're not filing on anything that actually goes on in communities like human trafficking and drug trafficking and terrorist financing. These things are not just relegated to the large banks. So I think, part of that issue is it does take a community bank 7 minutes to file a SAR because they're filing on a fraud case or they're filing on a structuring case, when they really should be having good technology that helps them find the illicit activity that's happening in every community. There's no community bank, a community that doesn't have this, this type of dirty money that's running through. It's just, do you have the right technology, the right mindset of the people? Or do we just leave that up to the big banks to find and to file on? And I think that's an unfair burden. It's not, I don't know. I guess I don't know the fix for it, but I think one of the things is making sure that every examiner, whether they're looking at a $22 million bank in the middle of, Indiana, or, $1 trillion bank. Of course, the risk-based approaches, a true risk-based approach starts with a threat focus, right? Just because they're $1 trillion bank and they're involved in different products doesn't mean that this $22 million bank doesn't have sophisticated illicit activity in it, right? Now, is it going to be at the volume of $1 trillion bank? No. No. But is it still very relevant? Yes. And it's how do we get that? How do we get that information in a timely and effectively written manner to law enforcement? But I think the key is we need to update the SAR form. I mean, the SAR form is so unbelievably not friendly. We don't like.
Well, yeah, and the SAR form, it used to have, I think it was 20 or 21 sort of categories of suspicious activity. And now and I'm going from memory here, I think there's 11 categories, and then there's about 90 total in those 11 categories. And you couldn't get the same person over 2 weeks filling in all those possibilities consistently, let alone 50 people in one bank, let alone 50 different banks doing it consistently. So I don't know if we're getting consistent usable information from this tremendously complex form. And then to your point, it's kind of stale now. I mean, crypto's not on that form at all. So I think they could do a lot of work with the form. But going back to the small banks and the community aspect, I think you're spot on. Human trafficking, the child sexual exploitation stuff, that happens locally. Mm-hmm. And it happens in the smallest banks, and it happens in the big banks, happens in all the banks. But how can these smallest banks actually pay attention and deploy the resources to do it? I don't know.
For me, it's level setting expectations for examiners. Like, in fact, we just got a comment in, and please send in your questions, but we just got a comment and I want to address it because I don't want it to seem like I'm saying that community banks need to be spending thousands of dollars more on people or technology. But unfortunately, and I've done one too many validations over the years where the examiner's expectations are, no, we want you to have 10,000 alerts a month and only produce one SAR and we're fine, or 5 SARs and we're fine with that. No, we need targeted threat approaches and not, I am dispositioning 1,500 alerts and 0 SARs out of that, and that's okay. Like, that should be part of the examination, and it should be definitely part of a validation. But, from a partner perspective, audit firms should be saying, hey, that's not great that y'all are spending, that y'all are dispositioning and reviewing 15,000 alerts a month, and out of that, you're getting 10 new SARs. Like, unreal. No wonder why they're filing a SAR or maybe 2 SARs a week. Yeah. Like, I think there's things that can happen from FinCEN, from law enforcement agencies where they can tell us, hey, this is a useful SAR. And I know you talk about that, but please hear me. I am not saying community banks, y'all need to be spending more money. No, your regulators need to have a reset of their satiety point of how many alerts that they expect for you. I had a client, I just want to give this example. I had a client for years, OCC Bank. They had some issues. They got out of it, deployed good technology, not the greatest, but really good targeted threat typologies. Their number of alerts went down. Their number of SARs went up, but not just the number of SARs, the number of requests for backup documents from law enforcement tripled, yeah. Which meant highly useful SARs, right? That is an indicator of highly useful SARs. And their regulators had an issue because their number of alerts went down.
So exactly, and that's the flaw.
Yeah.
And I call it the clash of the titles. Because the bank regulators are all about safety and soundness, and they're Title 12. AML laws or Title 31. You got the criminal laws, Title 18, kind of in the middle. But it's that clash between Title 12, safety and soundness. Are you doing all the alerts? Are you crossing your T's? Are you documenting your no SAR decisions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? very little attention is paid to Title 31 by the Title 12 examiners. Now, I'm not faulting the examiners because that's their mandate, safety and soundness. But there's an imbalance. And if we truly focused on threats, so a community bank sits down and goes, what are the threats in our community? Is it child predators? Is it Jeffrey Epstein? Is it, what are the threats? And then from that, they can say, okay, what are the risks to us as an institution from those threats? Okay, so let's just say that human trafficking, everyone agrees it's a big problem somewhere in Indiana, at this little bank in Indiana. So the regulators then come in and say, okay, what are your threats? What are the risks at your bank from those threats? Oh, human trafficking, great. Frankly, we don't give a shit if you're not filing on stupid stuff, as long as you're addressing the threats. They can't do that right now.
Yeah.
So, and that's pie in the sky.
Yeah. So can you talk about your SAR thresholds? I know I wanted to eventually get to that, but someone else had asked for it too. They want to. Yeah.
So where the CTR was 10,000 set in 1972 and it stays at 10,000.
Yeah.
The SAR was set in 1996 at 5,000. It's still 5,000. Okay. I'm fine with that threshold because you can do a voluntary SAR where it might be $1.50 or something like that you file on. Because a SAR is a subjective feeling. It's pretty much a subjective feeling, unless, of course, it's a fraud SAR, which is an objective event that you're reporting. But to the extent that it's not a fraud-related SAR, that subjectiveness, I think, makes that $5,000 threshold perfectly appropriate. Raising it, I think, is probably not a great idea because, again, you can do a lot of damage with $5,000 these days.
Yeah.
So I have no issue with the $5,000 threshold with SARs.
Yeah, and for money service businesses, it's lower, which I'm glad to see that. I don't want to see those thresholds going up, but I think part of what we need is that true feedback loop. I see, the government trusts AML officers appointed by the board enough to see documents and to file documents that can't even be discovered in a grand jury subpoena, right? That's SARs, super protected. They also trust them to see national security letters. There's a lot of trust bestowed on the board appointed AML officer. We should also have a mechanism by which that same trust that they already have also means that they get some feedback, and not just via 314A random names, right? But like, hey, this is a great SAR, keep doing it. Like the requests we get for backup docs, that's how it's interpreted on the bank and credit union side, right? Is, this SAR is useful. But I think a lot of times, even if it's just a, some type of, thumbs up, thumbs down, neutral type, there's got to be something that's more scalable than waiting for an agent to ask for backup documents.
Yeah, and I've blogged about this. I've called it the easy button because you have to make it easy for law enforcement. But it would be great if law enforcement had the ability, like an easy button.
Yeah.
That SAR or that CTR or the Form 8300 or the CMIR, whatever form it is, had either tactical or strategic value. Boom, boom, boom. And then we'd have that feedback. But that feedback is only important if you can do something with it.
Yeah.
So it's not only important which SARs provide highly useful information. What's really important is which SARs didn't. Because why don't we just stop doing all that?
Yeah.
There's 4.5 million SARs are going into the system every year, and very few of them are, accessed. Very few of them are used. Why are they used? We don't know.
Yeah.
But maybe, just maybe, we could clean up that and allow people to focus on the threats
Yeah.
and the real risks, and not just cranking stuff out. Because if you miss something, you're going to get jammed up by the regulators.
Yeah. Yes. Which actually I think is a good segue into one of the questions that we got. But it's about bank and fintech partnerships, community bank and fintech partnerships in particular from an AML perspective. I know the last several years we've seen a lot of consent orders, and I know that your opinion on some, not all of them, but on some of them are, well, the consent order lists these control failures, but it doesn't actually say, hey, you missed this known illicit activity. And I know, so, I think that means like the benchmark for what should be, part of a consent order, part of a penalty should be actual known illicit activity or actors. And instead it's just, hey, you missed the mark, but we don't really care whether or not the stuff that you missed was actually material. Is that?
If you think about it, go to the extreme, back to your glass of Chardonnay or whatever. And you have to have 3 or 4 glasses to make this make sense, I think. But under a classic risk-based approach, if your program, if there's no money laundering or suspicious activity going through your program, and you have no monitoring, nothing going on, it's kind of the perfect risk-based approach. We don't have to do anything because nothing is going on, right? But I've also written that a bank should not be subject to a public consent order unless there was undetected and unreported suspicious activity that was criminal in nature. How about that?
Yeah.
Because that's the whole point of these programs, really. The point is not to document your no-SAR decisions. The point is to provide timely, actionable intelligence to law enforcement. That's the whole point of what we're doing.
Yeah. And it's funny, one of the comments from Merrick said, I call the dark side of the risk-based approach the whim-based approach. I like that. I really like that. I thought that was good. I tend to tell people like stop because the risk-based approach is always attached to the risk assessment, which I say are just full of feelings. It's just all feelings sprinkled with some stats, and you can tell any story with stats, right? We know that. In fact, I think there's a book titled that, How to Tell Any Stories with Statistics. But with the risk-based approach, the whim-based approach, hardly ever do people talk about threats. And I think that's the language that the Treasury started using a couple years ago in their reports. That's now FinCEN using it, and a few of the federal banking agencies are starting to use, threats, that actual word. But I think it needs more FinCEN definitions. And I think the risk-based approach needs to be, find, replace with a threat-focused approach, right? And I think that's one of the things that'll cure it. I want to get to some of the questions here. There is a comment about how many country risk rating models at large global banks will list the U.S. as medium or even high risk based off of our FATF comments. And I think, I am not against that even now, even like before that, because we are the world's largest generator of offshore companies created from our onshore states, right? I read a stat. I was in Antigua years ago and working, and there was a stat at that time that said there was more offshore companies created in one building on one street in Delaware than the entire island of Bermuda. And that was years ago. So, you take that and you put that on all the other onshore, offshore states, and it's just, millions, I'm sure, if not hundreds of thousands of offshore companies created in the U.S. So, I am not against non-U.S. banks listing the U.S. as higher risk, even now. I don't know your thoughts on that. As a Canadian,
if it was done with integrity. But you're not going to look in the mirror and say you're ugly, right? It's just it's not going to happen.
No, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
Well, so I think there's a really good question here, and this is how we'll finish it out. But there's a really good question asking if we were king or queen for a day, what one thing would we change in the AML world? So I don't know. What do you think?
For me, I think it would be an easy one.
Hmm.
And that is, I'd ask FinCEN, could you just be a little more transparent? You know, just could you tell us if you're working on the SAR thresholds and CTR thresholds? You know, could you publish the SAR stats maybe every month? Could you just kind of do your job and let us know how it's going? Because it's just, to me, it's very frustrating that they're just not proactive. They're not transparent. And we all depend on them. You know, there's hundreds of thousands of filers and, regulated institutions. And it would be really nice if we could get a little bit more than what we're getting from them.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, I would want a bigger FIU, right? I feel like FinCEN, I feel like part of that problem is maybe cultural, the culture at FinCEN, but I think part of it is also we have one of the smallest FIUs when we see the sheer number of institutions that they have regulatory oversight in compared to peer nations. So, I'd love to see more people there. But I think for me, if I was queen for a day, I think the thing that I would like to see changed would be that secure feedback loop, because I think that is one of the main agents for change that we need. Because, if we don't have that from the agents who are consumers of SARs, banks are left kind of like trying to feel around in the dark. And it's like, oh, I think this is human trafficking when they're, or I think it's just structuring and it's actually tied to drug trafficking or, the cartels. We don't know. But I think having that type of a feedback loop, being very sensitive to the amount of information that's provided, but having something I think would probably be the first thing I would change. I don't know.
Yeah. And I will add to that.
Okay.
The feedback loop, but then I'll go back to my clash of the titles. The safety and soundness regulators have to give an inch. Yeah. They have to be able to say, you know what? Yeah, you filed 10,000 SARs in the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. 200 of them have been really important and provided great feedback. Those other 8,000 or so, figure out what you're doing and how those are alerting and how you get to those, and just stop doing that. It's not providing useful information to law enforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's hard because there are some times in which SARs aren't touched for years, right? Somebody, they aren't touched, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just the nature of when that SAR actually becomes important, maybe other pieces of the puzzle. Right. And that's kind of what stinks is like, we don't know when a SAR becomes useful. Is it immediately? Because, I filed SARs over the years where I hit that file button and I get a call immediately. And then there's years where I filed them and I've moved on and I've gone to other institutions. I've moved states, and then I pick up the news and I'm like, oh, I remember filing a SAR on that person.
That. Yeah. So I've written about this, and I've said 7 years. Law enforcement has 7 years. And if after 7 years, law enforcement has not told me that SAR provided tactical or strategic value, I will assume it provided no value.
Yeah.
And I will change what I was doing to produce that SAR and SARs like it. But again, the regulators have to say, okay, Jim, you can do that.
Right.
And they're not prepared to do that.
Yeah. Well, we got two last questions, one about elder exploitation and where that fits in the number of SARs. And I think that definitely depends on the state that you're in. The state of Florida just passed that law. They're super ninja about elder exploitation and reporting it and the burdens on financial institutions in the state of Florida. I think it would be pretty interesting to see, where that priority fits. I know you and Allison Jimenez do a lot of posting on SAR stats. So, but I want to get to one quick question before we sign off. Casey said, what are your thoughts on law enforcement partners providing training to AML programs on the language that they include in their own reports, so banks would know better how to communicate to the SAR readers? What are your thoughts on that? Yeah.
So there's two kinds of people. There's subject matter experts and subject matter enthusiasts. Subject matter expert. I'm a subject matter expert in AML. I'll give myself that. I am a subject matter enthusiast on crypto, but at least I recognize that I'm an enthusiast, not an expert. Yeah. I have to embrace the crypto experts. They have their expertise. They have to embrace my expertise, and together our enthusiasm and expertise blends, and we work it out. Same with law enforcement in the private sector. I've seen too many SARs mentioning debits and credits. There's a lot of police officers out there. What the hell's a debit? What the hell's a credit? Oh, you mean a withdrawal and a deposit? Oh, okay. Yeah. So it's that law enforcement expertise and the law enforcement enthusiasm, that kind of blend. Yeah. You gotta talk their language. Now you don't want to write a police report either. Right. Yes. So it's getting it together and keeping it simple and no, that is perfectly that is the way that it should be. I know that there are agencies that do offer that want you to partner up with your local federal law enforcement agency, and they will provide that. CI First is one of them under the IRS. HSI's Cornerstone program also has something very similar. So if you are an AML officer and you want someone to help you write a better SAR for them as the reader, please reach out. Jim and I know plenty of people in this space, and we'd be happy to connect you. And then there's the SAR review teams out of the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Yes.
And that's a great place to partner. You can learn from each other. The enthusiasm and experience can blend.
Yeah, exactly. I know we're like 2 minutes over. I just want to say thank you to Jim. Thank you for everyone joining us. We do have, so this is day 1 of Truth Hurts. Day 2 is on Thursday. There's a link in the comments, and we hope to see you on Thursday. We're going to be tackling several other items different from today. So Jim, do you have any last closing thoughts?
No, if folks want to send in things they want us to cover, because talk about anything you want.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much, Jim, and we will see you on Thursday.
You bet. Thanks.